Okay, well, let's shift to the Asia-Pacific region. Before we talk about China today, let's talk about a little of the history of the American alliance structures over there. Unlike Europe, where we were able to put together an alliance, NATO, that Germany was within the alliance because despite the animosities that many people had from previous occupations, and Nazi atrocities, and the fear that Germany might again rise to the military power and become aggressive, the United States was there as a balancer. And it was strategic cultures that were at work, and there were many other factors that were at work. But we had that kind of a multilateral alliance structure that we built in Europe. In the Asia-Pacific region, it was quite different. I doubt that you would find many people who would remember with kind of benign ways the Japanese occupation of their country. I doubt you'd find that in South Korea. I doubt you'd find that in China and many of the other Asian Pacific areas. But we've built a strong relationship with the Asian Pacific allies over time. We've done it largely through bilateral means. When the peace treaty was signed with Japan in 1951, part and parcel of that was an American security treaty with Japan that's been updated many times. Also in 1991, we, the Australians and the New Zealanders, went into ANZUS, which was multilateral of sorts. It was facilitated by the kind of shared values and experiences that we'd had. In 1951, we signed an alliance with the Philippines. In 1953, with South Korea. In 1954, we created an attempt at a multilateral organization, the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, but that would disintegrate over time. In Taiwan, after the Straits Crises of '54, we signed the first of our mutual security treaties with them. We had another Straits Crisis in '58. When we normalized relations with communist China, we had to terminate the security alliance that we had, but we had congressional resolutions have almost the same kind of effect to that in terms of. So you had all these bilateral relationships that you built up over time. And one of the things that you lack in a bilateral relationship, which I think we're trying to put in place right now, and I'd be interested in getting your comments on this. In NATO, you could exercise together, you could try to have forces that could work together. You never got perfect on that, but you tried to work toward it. Whereas if you only have bilateral relationships, you don't do that too well. But is there a way that we can use the bilateral relationships to network them into something that's wider than that, which I think is one of the kinds of things that Secretary Carter is talking about?
It's always useful to start with U.S. national interests. After all, that's what we're about.
Okay.
The national interest, U.S. national interests and European national interests tended to fit very nicely together during and after World War II, and up to the fact they still do pretty much today. But that national interest is about security, and with security, of course, goes economic and diplomatic, but it was primarily about security. Certainly arising from dealing with Germany, but continued by having to deal with the Soviet Union. You find no such commonality in the Pacific. If you think about the issues that we've been drawn into in the Pacific, Korea was only about Korea. Well, it was about China somewhat, but mostly Korea was about Korea. Vietnam was not about Vietnam. Vietnam was about the domino theory. And in spite of Secretary McNamara and his mea culpa book, that there's no reason, there's no basis for saying that domino theory wasn't valid. That who knows what would have been the result if North Vietnam hadn't paid such a high price for South Vietnam, which they now imagine they control. I have friends, by the way, who recently were in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City. They said, if you think that's the same country, you don't understand. but that's beside the point. Anyway,
Mhm.
so if you go around that basin, say, well, what's our real interest? And and it's the kind, mostly it's the global commons.
Mhm.
That so what's the single thing that kind of unites us all, or that gives us a common purpose? It's largely the global commons. The fact that Straits of Malacca, et cetera, that, but it's also something that we are committed to globally.
Mhm.
That is, there is global commons in the air, there's global commons on the sea, all the space is global commons, except my satellite. That's the only
Mhm.
sovereignty I have in space is my satellite.
Mhm.
Anyway, so if you're going to say, well, how do I draw the Philippines and Vietnam and Malaysia and Japan into some common interest, it really is about, it's about global commons, it's about economic resources,
Mhm.
oil and fishing, probably fishing more important than oil. But anyway, so we tend to make it about China, but that's quite a reach.
Mhm.
And if you say, well, look at the so-called islands or rocks. You say China claims a number of them and are building them up. Philippines claim more. Vietnam claims even more.
Mhm.
So we have a bilateral relationship with each. I'm not sure what kind of multilateral thing we're trying to achieve. If we instead adopt the attitude, well, we have a common enemy as China, and let's band together to contain China, I can think of no worse decision
Mhm.
that will surely work against our national interests. So I guess my unsatisfying answer is I don't see a lot of multilateral issues other than
Mhm.
our commitment to the global commons,
Mhm.
to everybody's benefit. By the way, who is the most dependent on the Straits of Malacca? Well, that would be China.
Mhm.
So,
No, it's a good answer because what you did basically was go back to probe the assumptions behind the question. What you pointed out there is, which can be the case with many kinds of questions that are asked, is unless you have the right set of assumptions behind the
yeah.
question, you're not going to go anyplace with the answers.